The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, warming Alexander Reed's face as he sat at the grand piano. His fingers danced across the ivory keys, filling the spacious living room with the sounds of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Though he couldn't see the sunlight, he could feel its warmth on his skin. At 17, Alexander had lived his entire life in darkness. Born blind, he had never seen the Manhattan skyline visible from his father's penthouse, never seen the faces of the staff who cared for him, and never seen the piano that had become his voice in a world he experienced through sound, touch, and smell. The final notes of the piece lingered in the air as Alexander sighed, his shoulders relaxing. This was his sanctuary. At the piano, he wasn't the blind kid or the billionaire's son. He was just a musician. "That was beautiful," said Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who had been with the family since Alexander was a baby. Her footsteps approached from the kitchen. "But shouldn't you be getting ready for your tutoring session? Your father scheduled Dr. Williams for 9 o'clock. Alexander's fingers stilled on the keys. "Another specialist?" Dad didn't mention anything. "He arranged it last night. Something about new techniques for spatial awareness." Mrs. Chen's voice carried her familiar mix of warmth and resignation. She, more than anyone, understood Alexander's frustration with his father's endless parade of specialists and consultants. "Of course he did," Alexander muttered, closing the piano lid gently. He stood and unfolded his white cane. "Heaven forbid I spend a morning just playing music." Mrs. Chen touched his arm lightly. "He wants what's best for you, Alexander. He just doesn't always know what that is." Victor Reed had built Reed Tech from a startup in his garage to a global empire worth billions. He approached every challenge like a business problem. Identify the issue, throw resources at it, and solve it. His son's blindness was the one problem he couldn't solve, no matter how much money he spent, and it drove him crazy. Alexander made his way to his bedroom, navigating the familiar space with ease. His room was meticulously organized, everything had its place. His father had installed the latest assistive technology, voice-activated everything, textured flooring patterns to help with orientation, and a closet system that announced what clothes he was touching, after changing into a simple button-down shirt and chinos, school uniform for the elite private academy he attended virtually. Alexander settled at his desk. His fingers found the braille reader connected to his computer. A notification popped up, an email from the Whitmore Academy of Music. His heart raced as his fingers moved across the braille dots. "Dear Mr. Reed, we are pleased to inform you that your audition recording has been accepted. You are invited to perform at the annual Whitmore Showcase on October 15th. Alexander pumped his fist in the air. "Yes," he whispered fiercely. He had applied secretly, sending a recording Miguel had helped him make, late one night when his father was away on business Ecower. Whitmore Showcase was the most prestigious event for young classical musicians in New York. Talent scouts from Juilliard, Curtis Institute, and other top conservatories would be there. This could be his ticket to a future in music, a future his father couldn't imagine for him. A knock at his door startled him. "Come in," he called, quickly closing the email. "Good morning, Alexander." His father's voice was brisk, efficient, the same voice he used in board meetings. "I've arranged for Dr. Williams to work with you this morning. He's pioneering some fascinating work on echolocation techniques." Alexander suppressed a sigh. "I have calculus and history today, Dad. My regular tutors, I've rescheduled them," Victor interrupted. "This is important. Dr. Williams can only see you today." Alexander's fingers clenched around his cane. "Always deciding, always arranging, always trying to fix him. Maybe I don't want to learn echolocation today," Alexander said quietly. "Maybe I just want a normal day of school." A heavy silence filled the room. Alexander could picture his father's face, not from memory but from description. Tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair, perpetually dressed in custom suits, with what the magazines called piercing blue eyes that Alexander had inherited but couldn't use. "Alexander," Victor's voice softened slightly. "These opportunities are important. Your education is important. My music is important too," Alexander said before he could stop himself. Another silence, heavier this time. "The piano is a wonderful hobby, and I'm glad it brings you joy. But we need to focus on practical skills that will prepare you for the real world, for a place at Reed Tech someday." The familiar argument hung between them. Victor saw music as therapy, A diversion, something to keep Alexander occupied. He couldn't understand that for Alexander, music wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. "Dr. Williams will be here in 30 minutes, Victor said finally. "Please be ready." His footsteps retreated, followed by the soft click of the door. Alexander slumped in his chair. How could he tell his father about the showcase? About his dreams of Juilliard? Victor Reed had Alexander's future mapped out: specialized college education, then a carefully crafted role at Reed Tech, with an army of assistants to help navigate his blindness. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "It's Miguel," came the familiar voice of the family driver, one of the few staff members Alexander truly considered a friend. "Your father asked me to drive you to the park after your session with the doctor. Said some fresh air would do you good." Alexander smiled for the first time that morning. "Thanks, Miguel. Everything okay?" Miguel asked, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "Got into the Whitmore showcase," Alexander whispered. "No way. That's huge." Miguel's genuine excitement was a balm to Alexander's spirit. "We should celebrate. Maybe stop for those chocolate croissants you like on the way back." "Deal," Alexander said, "but not a word to my father." "My lips are sealed," Miguel promised. "But eventually I'll tell him," Alexander agreed. "After I perform. Once he sees what I can do." After Miguel left, Alexander returned to the piano for a few precious minutes before Dr. Williams arrived. His fingers found the keys for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece he would play at the showcase. It was ambitious, technically demanding, and emotionally complex. Perfect to prove himself. As the powerful chords filled the room, Alexander allowed himself to dream. He imagined the hushed audience at the showcase, the thunderous applause after his performance, the offers from music schools. He imagined his father finally understanding that his son's blindness wasn't something to fix. It was part of who he was, just as music was part of who he was. The session with Dr. Williams was as tedious as Alexander had expected. 2 hours of clicking exercises and spatial awareness drills that left him with a headache and no real improvement. "Your son shows remarkable potential," Dr. Williams told Victor as they wrapped up. With consistent practice of these techniques, he could significantly improve his independence. Alexander bit his tongue. He was already independent in the ways that mattered to him. He didn't need to see the world to navigate it or to fill it with beautiful music. "We'll practice daily," Victor promised, clapping Dr. Williams on the shoulder. "Whatever it takes." Later, as Miguel drove him to Washington Square Park, Alexander leaned his head against the cool window of the car. "He means well," Miguel said quietly, seeming to read Alexander's thoughts. "I know," Alexander sighed. "He spent millions trying to fix me. The specialists, the experimental treatments, the cutting-edge tech. He can't accept that some things can't be solved with money. Parents struggle to see their children as separate people sometimes," Miguel offered, "with their own dreams." The car slowed to a stop. "We're here," Miguel announced. "Want me to walk with you to the piano?" The public piano in Washington Square Park had become Alexander's favorite escape. Unlike the pristine Steinway in their penthouse, this piano had character, slightly out of tune, worn keys, and surrounded by the vibrant energy of the park. "I know the way," Alexander said, unfolding his cane. "Give me an hour?" "Take your time," Miguel replied. "I'll be right here." Alexander made his way through the familiar paths of the park, his cane sweeping rhythmically in front of him. The sounds of the city surrounded him: children laughing, dogs barking, snippets of conversation, street musicians playing in different corners of the park. When his cane touched the concrete platform where the piano sat, Alexander smiled. Home away from home. He settled onto the bench, running his fingers lightly over the keys to reacquaint himself with this particular instrument. Then he began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but Chopin again, letting the music flow through him, forgetting about his father, Dr. Williams, and even the upcoming showcase. For these precious moments, nothing existed but the music and the gentle autumn breeze, carrying it across Washington Square Park. He didn't notice the footsteps that paused nearby, or realize that someone was listening intently to every note, someone whose presence would soon change his life forever. The crisp autumn air carried the last notes of Alexander's Chopin piece across Washington Square Park. For a moment, he sat still, letting his hands rest on the keys, enjoying the brief escape from his life of constant expectations and carefully scheduled hours. "You're rushing the middle section." The voice, young, female, and unexpectedly close, startled Alexander from his thoughts. He hadn't heard anyone approach, too lost in his music. "Excuse me?" he asked, turning his head toward the voice. "The part where it gets all dreamy," the girl continued. "You're rushing through it, like you're afraid to let it breathe." Alexander raised his eyebrows. Most people just complimented his playing, impressed that a blind teenager could play at all. Nobody criticized his technique. "I'm not rushing," he said, feeling oddly defensive. "I'm interpreting it my way," a soft laugh. "Sure, if your way is wrong." He heard the girl shuffle closer, the crunch of fallen leaves under her shoes. There was something strange about her movement, hesitant yet determined. "Mind if I show you?" she asked. Before Alexander could respond, he felt the bench shift as she sat beside him. A whiff of something that wasn't quite perfume, more like cheap soap, reached him, along with another smell he couldn't place. Something musty, like old clothes left too long in a damp place. "I'm Ellie," she said, "and you're pretty good, just impatient in spots." Her fingers touched the keys, and within moments Alexander's irritation melted away. She was playing the exact section she'd criticized, and he had to admit, she was right. Where he had moved quickly through the delicate middle passage, she lingered, giving each note space to breathe and shimmer in the air. "That's how Chopin meant it," she said, finishing the section and pulling her hands away. "Like you're telling a secret, not announcing it." Alexander swallowed. "You really know your Chopin?" "I really know my piano," Ellie replied. "Been playing since I was 5. Alexander's fingers returned to the keys, trying to replicate what she'd done. "Like this?" "Closer," she said. "But you're still holding back. Let the music carry you, not the other way around." For nearly 20 minutes, they sat together on the bench working through the piece, Ellie offering corrections, Alexander adjusting. It was unlike any lesson he'd ever had with his formal teachers. Ellie didn't care about proper posture or textbook techniques. She cared about the heart of the music. "You're Alexander Reed, aren't you?" she asked suddenly, after he'd finally played the section to her satisfaction. "The Billionaire's kid." Alexander stiffened. "How'd you know?" "Your picture was in some magazine," she said. "Rich kid who plays piano despite being blind. Very inspirational." The way she said inspirational made it sound like a dirty word. "Great," Alexander muttered. "So now you're impressed because the blind boy can play piano?" "Nope," Ellie replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm unimpressed because you're rushing Chopin, and you're way too tense for someone who clearly has talent." Alexander laughed despite himself. "Well, that's a first." A gust of wind blew across the park, and Alexander heard Ellie pull something around herself, a coat or jacket rustling. "Cold?" he asked. "It's fine," she replied quickly. "So what's a fancy kid like you doing playing on a park piano when you probably have some crazy expensive Steinway at home?" "How'd you know it's a Steinway?" "Lucky guess," she said. "Am I right?" Alexander nodded. "My father believes in having the best of everything." "Must be nice," she murmured, and something in her voice made Alexander curious. "What about you?" he asked. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "Juilliard?" A long pause followed his question. "Not exactly," Ellie finally said. "Small music school in Ohio. For a while, anyway." She played a quick, light sequence of notes, something playful and improvised. "Now I just play whenever I can find a piano. Like this one." "You live in New York?" Another pause. "You could say that." Before Alexander could ask more, he heard quick footsteps approaching, Miguel's distinctive stride. "Alexander," Miguel called. "Your father called. He wants you home for a late lunch with some business associate." Alexander sighed. "Duty calls." "The life of a billionaire's son," Ellie said, a trace of something, not quite mockery, not quite envy, in her voice. Alexander stood, unfolding his cane. "Will you be here tomorrow? I'd like to play more with you." "Maybe," Ellie said. "I'm around the park most days." "Alexander," Miguel said, closer now. "We should go. Your father was quite insistent." "Right," Alexander nodded. "Nice meeting you, Ellie." "You too, rich boy," she replied. As Miguel guided him back to the car, Alexander found himself smiling. "Who was that?" Miguel asked. "Just a girl," Alexander said. "A really good pianist. Looked kind of rough," Miguel commented quietly. Her clothes were pretty worn out. Alexander frowned. What do you mean? Miguel hesitated. Nothing, really. Just an observation. Throughout the tedious lunch with his father and some tech investor, Alexander's thoughts kept drifting back to Ellie, the way she played, her blunt criticism, the strange pauses in their conversation, and now Miguel's comment about her appearance. The next morning, Alexander convinced Mrs. Chen he needed fresh air before starting his studies. Miguel can take me to the park again, he said. Just for an hour. Your father won't like it, Mrs. Chen warned. My father's in meetings all morning, Alexander countered. Please, Mrs. Chen. She relented, and soon Alexander was back at Washington Square Park, making his way to the public piano. It was earlier than yesterday, and the morning air was still cool and misty. As he approached the piano, he heard soft, even breathing. Stopping a few feet away, he listened. Someone was sleeping on the piano bench. Ellie, he called softly. A sudden rustling, then the sound of someone sitting up quickly. Who's there? A panicked voice, Ellie's voice. It's Alexander. From yesterday. Oh. Her voice relaxed slightly. You're early. Alexander stepped closer, his cane tapping against the concrete. Were you sleeping here? Just resting my eyes, she said, but the defensive tone told him she was lying. Waiting for you to show up and rush through more Chopin. Alexander sat beside her on the bench. Now that he was closer, he noticed the smells from yesterday were stronger. The mustiness of her clothes, a hint of sweat, the cheap soap. Do you live in the park? He asked directly. A long silence followed. What makes you think that? Just connecting dots, Alexander said. Miguel mentioned your clothes. You're here early in the morning, and you seem to know this piano well. Ellie sighed. You got me. I'm basically the queen of Washington Square Park. This bench is my throne. Despite her attempt at humor, Alexander heard the tension in her voice. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to pry. Yes, you did, Ellie retorted. But it's fine. Not like it's a big secret. Half the regular park visitors know me by now. Alexander's fingers found the piano keys, playing a few soft notes. How long have you been staying here? About 8 months, Ellie said, her voice matter-of-fact. Before that, I crashed with some other music students, but that fell through. Before that, a shelter in Harlem, but my stuff kept getting stolen. The park's better in good weather. And in bad weather? I manage, she said firmly. Subway stations, the occasional church shelter. Sometimes a student center if I can sneak in and look like I belong. Alexander was stunned. He'd read about homelessness, of course, but had never actually met someone without a home. The concept seemed almost unreal to him, like something from another world. What about your family in Ohio? He asked. Ellie's hands hit the piano keys hard, producing a jarring discord. Not an option. The finality in her voice warned Alexander not to push further. Instead, he changed the subject. Will you teach me that section of the Rachmaninoff you were playing yesterday? The part where you were using both hands to create that rolling effect? Ellie seemed to relax. Sure, rich boy. Though I charge for lessons now. $1 per minute. Alexander smiled, pulling out his wallet. I've only got a 20. 20 minutes it is then, she said, taking the bill. He heard her fold it carefully and tuck it away. They began playing, and soon Alexander forgot about Ellie's situation, lost in the music and her surprisingly effective teaching style. She was demanding but encouraging, pushing him to feel the music rather than just play the notes. You're playing like you're afraid of making a mistake, she told him. That's the worst mistake of all. My regular teacher is big on technical precision, Alexander explained. Technical precision without emotion is just showing off, Ellie countered. Music needs to breathe to live. An hour passed quickly, and Alexander realized they'd gone well beyond the 20 minutes he'd paid for. I should probably get back, he said reluctantly, but I want to keep practicing with you. Would you be interested in regular sessions? What, like I'm your teacher now? Ellie asked, sounding amused. More like a practice partner, Alexander suggested. I'm preparing for the Whitmore showcase next month and I could use the help. Whitmore? Ellie's voice changed. A note of recognition and something else, longing, perhaps. That's a big deal. You know it? Every serious music student in New York knows Whitmore, she said. Talent Scouts, scholarship offers, the works, Alexander nodded. I'm playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 first movement. Ambitious, Ellie commented. And beautiful. I'd love to help you prepare. Really? Alexander felt a surge of excitement. I'll pay you, of course. Of course, Ellie agreed, a smile in her voice. Rich boy like you can afford it. As Miguel approached to take him home, Alexander made plans to meet Ellie the next day. Walking back to the car, he couldn't help but wonder about this girl who played like a concert pianist but slept on park benches. Everything okay? Miguel asked as they drove away. Alexander nodded slowly. I think I just found my new piano teacher, he said. And I think she needs our help, even if she won't admit it. Over the next 3 weeks, Alexander met with Ellie at Washington Square Park almost daily. Their sessions quickly became the highlight of his days. Unlike his formal teachers who treated him delicately, Ellie pushed him hard, challenging him to move beyond technical perfection to find the emotional heart of Rachmaninoff's concerto. You're playing all the right notes, she told him one crisp October afternoon, but you're not telling the story. What story? Alexander asked, his fingers pausing on the keys. Rachmaninoff wrote this after a deep depression, Ellie explained. This concerto was his comeback, his way of saying, I'm still here. I still have something to give. You need to play it like you're fighting for something that matters. Alexander nodded, understanding dawning. His hands returned to the keys, and this time, he poured his own struggles into the music, his frustration with his father's expectations, his desire to be seen as more than a blind boy, his dream of a future filled with music. That's it, Ellie whispered when he finished. That's what Whitmore needs to hear. As the showcase approached, Alexander still hadn't told his father. Each time he tried, Victor Reed was distracted by business calls or launching into monologues about Alexander's future at Reed Tech. The secret weighed on him, but the thought of his father's dismissal or, worse, his attempt to stop him kept Alexander silent. You'll have to tell him eventually, Miguel pointed out one day as he drove Alexander home from the park. I know. Alexander sighed, but I want him to see me perform first. Maybe then he'll understand what music means to me. And what about your friend? Miguel asked. What are you going to do about Ellie? That question had been bothering Alexander too. In their weeks of practice, he'd learned more about Ellie's situation. She'd been a scholarship student at a small conservatory in Ohio until family problems forced her to flee. She'd come to New York with dreams of Juilliard, but those dreams had faded as survival became her priority. She worked odd jobs when she could find them, played for tips in subway stations, and slept wherever she felt safe. I've tried to help, Alexander told Miguel. She won't take much. It was true. Beyond their lesson payments, which Ellie accepted as earned income, not charity, she refused most offers of help. Alexander had managed to convince her to take a prepaid hotel room during a heavy rainstorm, and occasionally she accepted a meal, but her pride was fierce. Maybe after Whitmore, Alexander said. If things go well, maybe I can convince her to let me help more. The night before the showcase, Alexander finally worked up the courage to tell his father. He found Victor in his home office, surrounded by digital displays showing stock prices and company reports. Dad, Alexander began, I need to tell you something important. Victor's fingers continued typing. Can it wait, son? I've got a board meeting in the morning and these quarterly projections. I'm performing at the Whitmore Academy Showcase tomorrow night, Alexander blurted out. The typing stopped. You're what? I've been accepted to play at the Whitmore Showcase. It's a big honor, and talent scouts from music schools will be there, and I've been practicing for months and... Slow down, Victor interrupted. How did this happen? Who put you up to this? The accusation stung. Nobody put me up to anything, Dad. I applied on my own. I recorded an audition. I was selected based on merit. A heavy silence filled the room. Alexander could picture his father processing this information, recalculating his plans. Alexander, Victor finally said, his voice carefully controlled. While I admire your initiative, I think this is a mistake. You're not ready for that kind of public scrutiny. Not ready? Alexander echoed. I've been playing piano since I was 4. As a hobby, yes. But the Whitmore Showcase is for serious musicians pursuing professional careers. That's not the path we've discussed for you. Maybe it's the path I want to discuss, Alexander said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. Victor sighed. Son, I understand the appeal. Music has been a wonderful outlet for you, but we need to be realistic about your limitations. The word hung in the air between them. limitations. Always his blindness, always the thing his father couldn't fix, couldn't control. My blindness doesn't limit my ability to play, Alexander said quietly. You know that. Playing is one thing. A career is another. The professional music world is brutally competitive for people without additional challenges. Alexander's hands clenched around his cane. I'm performing tomorrow night, he said firmly. I'd like you to be there. Another long silence followed. Then, to Alexander's surprise, his father said, All right, I'll be there. You will? Yes, Victor said, his tone unreadable. If this is important to you, I should see it for myself. Relief and anxiety mingled in Alexander's chest. Thank you, Dad. As he left the office, Alexander wasn't sure whether to feel victorious or terrified. His father would be there, watching, judging, measuring his performance against some invisible standard. The day of the showcase passed in a blur of last-minute practice and nervousness. Alexander met Ellie at the park for a final run-through. You're overthinking it, she told him. Just remember what we worked on. Feel the music, tell the story. I told my father, Alexander said. He's coming tonight. Ellie squeezed his hand. Good. He should see how amazing you are. Will you be there? Alexander asked hopefully. A pause. I'll try, Ellie said. Can't promise prime seating, but I'll try to slip in. Evening arrived, and Miguel drove Alexander to the Whitmore Academy, a historic building in Manhattan that housed one of the city's most prestigious music programs. Backstage was a flurry of activity, musicians tuning instruments, parents giving last-minute encouragement, teachers making adjustments. Alexander sat quietly, going through the concerto in his mind, fingers moving on imaginary keys. A stagehand approached. Mr. Reed, you're on in 15 minutes. Anything you need before you go on? I'm fine, thank you, Alexander replied, though his stomach was turning flips. The stagehand hesitated. Just so you know, the house is packed. Word got out that Victor Reed's son was performing and, well, it's quite the society event now. Alexander's heart sank. This was what he'd feared, that his father's name would overshadow his playing, that people would come to see the billionaire's blind son, not to hear a musician. From the stage, he could hear the current performer finishing to enthusiastic applause. The MC announced a 5-minute intermission, and the backstage area grew more hectic. Alexander? His father's voice cut through the noise. Dad, what are you doing backstage? Victor's hand touched his shoulder. I wanted to wish you luck, and to let you know that I brought some colleagues. The executive team wanted to support you. Alexander's anxiety doubled. The entire Reed Tech leadership was here. Great, he managed to say. Thanks for coming. Mr. Reed, you're up next. The stagehand was back. They're ready for you. Taking a deep breath, Alexander unfolded his cane and followed the stagehand. Victor's hand squeezed his shoulder once more. Do your best, son. The stage felt enormous as Alexander crossed it, the audience a vast murmuring presence beyond the bright lights. The stagehand guided him to the grand piano and helped him find the bench. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, our next performer is Alexander Reed playing the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. A hush fell over the crowd. Alexander positioned his hands over the keys, took a deep breath and began to play. The opening chords rang out, powerful and resonant. For a few beautiful moments, everything was perfect. Alexander lost himself in the music, just as he had practiced with Ellie. Then it happened. The piano, different from the one he'd practiced on, tuned slightly differently, threw him off. A wrong note, then another. The rhythm faltered. Alexander paused, trying to find his place, but the break in concentration was costly. The bright lights, which he normally couldn't see but could sense as warmth on his face, seemed to intensify. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His fingers, usually so confident, felt clumsy and foreign. From the audience came a sound that cut him to the core, a snicker, followed by whispers. That's Victor Reed's blind kid. Guess money can't buy talent. What did he expect? The words weren't loud, but in the moment of his stumble, they seemed to fill the hall. Alexander forced himself to continue to find the music again, but the damage was done. Where the piece should have soared, it limped. Where it should have moved hearts, it merely filled time. When he finally finished, the applause was polite but tepid, the kind reserved for a brave but failed attempt. Alexander stood, bowed in the direction of the audience, and made his way off stage, each tap of his cane against the floor a reminder of his failure. In the wings, he heard the judges talking, not realizing he was within earshot. Unfortunate performance, one said. Technically deficient. Well, we all know why he was selected, another replied. The Reed name opens doors. Alexander felt his face burn with shame. Not only had he failed, but they thought he'd only been chosen because of his father's influence. Alexander. His father's voice, careful and controlled. You did fine considering. The qualifier said everything. Considering you're blind. Considering it's just a hobby. Considering you're not meant for this. Thanks for coming, Dad, Alexander said, his voice hollow. Let me take you home. Victor offered. We can discuss more suitable opportunities for you. In fact, I have some ideas for a special project at ReedTech that might interest you. Alexander wanted to scream, to tell his father that one setback didn't invalidate his dream. Instead, he nodded numbly, letting himself be led through the backstage area, past other performers who fell silent as he passed, their pity palpable. In the car, Miguel didn't ask how it went. The silence told him everything. I'm sorry, Miguel finally said as they neared the penthouse. Did you see Ellie there? Alexander asked, suddenly remembering. No, Miguel replied gently. I didn't see her. Back home, Alexander shut himself in his room, refusing dinner or company. He sat in darkness, a darkness that for once matched his mood, and thought about the disaster of the evening. The whispers, the judge's comments, his father's carefully measured reaction. For the first time since he was very young, Alexander cried, not because of his blindness, but because of what it had come to represent to everyone around him. A limitation, a problem, a reason to expect less. 3 days passed. Alexander didn't touch the piano. He barely left his room. Mrs. Chen brought trays of food that he hardly touched. His father made awkward attempts at conversation, always steering toward ReedTech and away from music. On the 4th day, Miguel knocked on his door. Alexander, are you up for some fresh air? Maybe a drive? Not today, Miguel, thanks. The park piano misses you, Miguel said. And I think someone else does too. Alexander hesitated. Ellie? I drove by this morning, Miguel said. She was playing your piece. The Rachmaninoff. For the first time in days, Alexander felt a flicker of interest. Give me 10 minutes, he said. Miguel drove slowly through the morning traffic, giving Alexander time to prepare himself. For days, Alexander had replayed the disaster at Whitmore in his mind. Every missed note, every whisper from the audience, every word of his father's carefully measured disappointment. She might not still be there, Miguel warned as they neared the park. I saw her about 2 hours ago. It's okay, Alexander said, though his heart raced at the thought of seeing Ellie again. What would she think of his failure? Would she be disappointed? Angry about the wasted weeks of practice? The car stopped. We're here, Miguel announced. Want me to walk with you? No, Alexander replied, unfolding his cane. I need to do this myself. The familiar path through Washington Square Park felt different now. The sounds of children playing and dogs barking seemed distant, muted by his own thoughts. As he neared the public piano, he heard it, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, played with a passion and precision that made his heart ache. Ellie was still there, her fingers dancing across the keys of the weathered piano, drawing from it sounds Alexander hadn't known it could produce. He stopped a few yards away, listening. She played the very section where he had stumbled, but in her hands it soared. A small crowd had gathered. Alexander could hear their murmurs of appreciation, a few coins dropping into what he guessed was a cup or hat. When she finished, there was enthusiastic applause. Thank you, Ellie's voice slightly breathless. Thanks so much. As the crowd dispersed, Alexander stepped forward, his cane tapping against the concrete. That was beautiful, he said. Alexander, surprise and something else, relief? Filled her voice. You're back. He moved closer until his legs touched the bench. May I sit? Of course. She slid over, making room. For a moment, neither spoke. Alexander's fingers hovered over the keys but didn't press down. I was at Whitmore, Ellie finally said. In the standing section at the back. Alexander's stomach clenched. So you saw. I heard, she corrected gently. And yes, it wasn't your best. The blunt assessment, so typical of Ellie, made Alexander smile despite himself. That's one way to put it. Complete disaster would be another. It wasn't that bad. Please don't lie to make me feel better, Alexander said. I could hear the whispers. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. You weren't playing the piano that night. What do you mean? I was literally playing the piano. No, Ellie insisted. You were thinking about playing the piano. There's a difference, Alexander frowned. I don't understand. When you play here in the park, you lose yourself in the music. But at Whitmore, you were too aware of the audience, of your father, of what everyone was thinking. You were playing the role of a pianist, not the music. Her words struck a chord of truth. Alexander had been so focused on proving himself, to his father, to the judges, to the world, that he'd forgotten what Ellie had taught him about finding the heart of the music. It doesn't matter now, he sighed. It's over. My father's already talking about a more suitable path for me. So that's it? Ellie asked, a challenge in her voice. One bad performance and you give up? You don't understand. My father is one person, she interrupted. With one opinion. A powerful opinion in your life, sure, but still just one. Alexander shook his head. You didn't hear the judges. They said I was only selected because of my father's name. And you believe that? No, I earned my spot. Then prove it, Ellie said simply. Play again. Play better. Alexander's fingers finally touched the keys, pressing down softly. There are no more showcases this year. So we find another opportunity. Ellie nudged his shoulder. The world doesn't end at Whitmore, rich boy. Despite everything, Alexander smiled at the nickname. I've missed this, he admitted. Missed playing. Missed talking to you. Yeah, well, Ellie said, her voice softening. The park's been pretty quiet without you showing off your fancy classical training. Alexander laughed, then grew serious. I don't know what to do next, Ellie. Music is everything to me, but maybe my father's right. Maybe I'm not cut out for it professionally. Can I show you something? Ellie asked. Without waiting for an answer, she began to play a different arrangement of the Rachmaninoff concerto, one Alexander had never heard before. It maintained the essence of the original but transformed it into something new, something that spoke directly to the heart. What is that? He asked when she finished. My arrangement, Ellie explained. I've been working on it since I heard you play it the first time. It's incredible, Alexander said, genuinely awed. You changed it, but somehow made it more truthful. That's what music is, Ellie said, taking notes on a page and turning them into truth. Anyone can play notes, Alexander. Not everyone can play truth. Can you teach me, he asked. Not just the notes, but that. That's what I've been trying to do all along, Ellie said with a laugh. But you were too busy worrying about being perfect. Over the next 2 weeks, they met daily at the park. This time, Ellie's lessons went deeper. She taught Alexander to feel the music rather than think it, to let his fingers find their way through passages by instinct rather than calculation, to play from his heart rather than his head. Close your eyes, she instructed one afternoon, then laughed. Sorry, just focus on feeling, not on getting every note right. But the notes matter, Alexander insisted. Of course they do, Ellie agreed. But they're like words in a sentence. Getting all the words right doesn't matter if you don't understand what the sentence means. As they worked together, Alexander learned more about Ellie's past. She had been a prodigy, recognized early for her exceptional talent, but her family had been troubled. Her father abusive, her mother absent. The small music school in Ohio had been her escape, until her scholarship was cut due to budget issues. I could have stayed with my parents, she said matter-of-factly, but the choice was between being homeless in New York or being trapped in Ohio. I chose freedom. Alexander marveled at her resilience. While he had spent his life in luxury, worrying about living up to his father's expectations, Ellie had been fighting for survival, yet still found time to play, to create beauty in the midst of hardship. One rainy afternoon, they couldn't practice at the park. Instead, Miguel drove them to a small diner where they could talk over hot coffee. You need to eat something real, Alexander insisted, ordering soup and sandwiches for both of them. I manage, Ellie said, but accepted the food gratefully. Why won't you let me help you more? Alexander asked. I have resources. My father, don't, Ellie cut him off. I don't want your father's money or your charity. I'm not a project, Alexander. It's not charity, Alexander protested. It's friendship. Friends help each other. You are helping me, Ellie said. These meals, the occasional hotel room when it's pouring rain. That's friendship. Anything more would change things between us. Alexander understood, even if he didn't agree. Ellie's pride was as much a part of her as her talent. There's something else we need to talk about, Ellie said, changing the subject. Your father's charity concert. Alexander frowned. What charity concert? It was in the paper this morning. Your father's hosting a winter charity event for the Whitmore Academy. Apparently, he's become a major donor. Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. He what? Become a major donor, Ellie repeated. The article said it was part of his ongoing commitment to arts education. Alexander shook his head in disbelief. He's never cared about arts education before. This is about me. He's trying to, make up for Whitmore? Control the situation somehow? Whatever his reasons, Ellie said thoughtfully, it gives you an opportunity. What do you mean? Major donors usually get performance slots at these events. It's how these things work. You could play again, on your own terms this time. Alexander considered this. Maybe, but even if I get a slot, what would be different? I'd still be the blind son of Victor Reed trying to prove himself. Ellie was quiet for a moment, stirring her soup. Then she said, What if you weren't alone? What do you mean? What if we played together? A duet. Alexander's heart raced at the idea. You and me? At my father's charity concert? Why not? Ellie seemed to be warming to the idea. We could arrange the Rachmaninoff for 2 pianos. It would be unexpected, dramatic. My father would never agree to it, Alexander said. He doesn't even know about you. So tell him, Ellie challenged. Better yet, show him. Record us playing together. The idea took root in Alexander's mind. A second chance not to prove himself alone, but to create something beautiful with Ellie, to show his father what music really meant to him. We'd need access to 2 pianos to practice properly, Alexander said, already problem-solving, and you'd need proper clothes for the event. Are you saying my park bench fashion isn't fancy enough for high society? Ellie teased. Alexander laughed. I'm saying we'd both need to look the part, and you'd need somewhere stable to stay while we prepare. No more park benches and subway stations. Alexander, Ellie began, her tone warning. Not charity, he interrupted. Payment for professional services. I'm hiring you as my duet partner and arrangement consultant. Standard industry rates. Ellie was quiet for so long that Alexander worried he'd offended her. Finally, she said, You're sneaky, rich boy. Is that a yes? It's a we'll see, Ellie replied. First, record us playing at the park. If your father is impressed enough to agree to the duet, then we can discuss terms. The next day was bright and clear. Miguel helped Alexander set up a high-quality recording device near the park piano. They worked through their arrangement of the Rachmaninoff, simplified in places to work with the single piano, but with a new complexity in how they handed off melodies between them, how their playing styles complemented each other. As they played the final notes, Alexander heard applause from a larger crowd than usual. That, said an elderly man's voice, was quite extraordinary. Thank you, Ellie replied. Are you 2 students at Whitmore? The man asked. I was briefly, Alexander said. It didn't work out. Pity, the man remarked. That was conservatory-level playing from both of you, particularly the interaction between the parts. Very intuitive. After the crowd dispersed, Ellie nudged Alexander. Do you know who that was? No, who? That was Robert Hayes, Ellie said, awe in her voice. He's the dean of Juilliard's piano department. Alexander's breath caught. Are you sure? Absolutely. I've seen his picture 100 times. Ellie's voice shook slightly. He said we were conservatory level, Alexander. Both of us. For the first time since the Whitmore disaster, Alexander felt a surge of hope. Then let's make sure my father hears our recording. That evening, Alexander played the recording for his father. Victor Reed listened in silence. Well, Alexander asked when it finished. What do you think? Who is she? Victor asked. Your duet partner. Her name is Ellie. She's a friend, a fellow pianist. She's very good, Victor admitted. Where did she study? Alexander hesitated, then decided on honesty. She's currently between schools. And between homes, actually. What does that mean? It means she's homeless, Dad. She lives in Washington Square Park. That's where I met her. Victor was silent again, processing this information. And you want to perform with her at the charity concert? Yes, Alexander said firmly. As a duet. We're arranging the Rachmaninoff concerto for 2 pianos. Alexander, his father began cautiously. While I appreciate your initiative, I'm not sure this is appropriate. We know nothing about this girl. I know everything I need to know, Alexander countered. She's brilliant, dedicated, and has taught me more about music in a few weeks than years of formal lessons. Listen to the recording again, Dad, really listen. To Alexander's surprise, Victor did just that. When the recording finished for the second time, his father sighed. You really want this, don't you? More than anything, Alexander said. Please, Dad, one chance, another long silence. Then, all right, on one condition. Name it. Your friend stays here until the concert. In the guest suite. No more park benches, Alexander grinned. I'll talk to her. And Alexander, his father added, if this works, if the concert goes well, we'll talk seriously about your future in music. No promises, but we'll talk. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. As Miguel drove him back to the park to find Ellie, Alexander felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since before the Whitmore disaster. He had a second chance, a new direction, and most importantly, he wasn't facing it alone. Convincing Ellie to stay at the Reed penthouse proved harder than Alexander had expected. They argued for nearly an hour in Washington Square Park, their voices sometimes rising above the traffic noise and street performers. It's not charity, Alexander insisted for the third time. It's practical. We need to practice on real grand pianos, not this park upright, and we need to work together every day until the concert. I can come to your place during the day and leave at night, Ellie countered. I've managed fine so far. It's December, Alexander said, exasperation creeping into his voice. It's getting colder every night. The guest suite has its own bathroom, a practice piano, and Mrs. Chen's cooking 3 times a day. And your father is okay with a homeless girl staying in his multi-million-dollar penthouse? Alexander hesitated. He's coming around to the idea. The truth was more complicated. Victor Reed had reluctantly agreed but insisted on a background check, which Ellie would surely refuse if she knew about it. Alexander had argued against it, but his father was immovable on this point. Look, Alexander said, switching tactics. Think of it as a residency. Musicians do them all the time. Live somewhere temporarily while preparing for a specific performance. Ellie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. You're not going to drop this, are you? Nope, Alexander grinned. I'm as stubborn as you are. Fine, she finally conceded. But just until the concert, and I'm still taking it as payment for professional services, not charity. Deal. Alexander agreed quickly before she could change her mind. Miguel can drive us now. Do you need to get anything? Everything I own is in this backpack, Ellie said, and Alexander heard the rustle of fabric as she lifted it. Let's go before I come to my senses. The days that followed were intense. Victor Reed had arranged for 2 grand pianos to be placed in the penthouse's rarely used formal living room. Alexander and Ellie spent hours there, refining their arrangement, figuring out how to complement each other's playing style, learning to communicate without words, a nod, a breath, a slight change in tempo that told the other exactly when to come in or fade back. Mrs. Chen took to Ellie immediately, clucking over her thinness and making it her personal mission to put some meat on those bones. Ellie, initially stiff and formal around the housekeeper, gradually relaxed as she realized Mrs. Chen's mothering came with no strings attached. Victor Reed was a different story. He was cordial but distant, watching their practice sessions without comment, nodding politely at dinner when Ellie spoke but offering little in return. Alexander could sense his father's reservations, his worry that Alexander was setting himself up for another public failure. A week before the concert, Victor entered the living room during a practice break. How are the preparations coming along? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. Really well, Alexander replied. Ellie's arrangement is incredible. The way it distributes the orchestral parts between the 2 pianos is genius. Ellie shifted uncomfortably at the praise. It's just an arrangement. It's more than that, Alexander insisted. It transforms the piece into something new. Victor cleared his throat. The guest list for the concert has grown considerably. The Whitmore board is impressed with the donor response. There will be representatives from several conservatories in attendance. Alexander's heart raced, including Juilliard. Yes, Victor confirmed. Dean Hayes specifically requested an invitation after hearing about your planned duet. Ellie made a small, startled sound. Alexander reached out, finding her hand and squeezing it. "We'll be ready," he told his father confidently. Victor nodded. "I'm sure you will." He turned to leave, then paused. "Ellie, may I have a word with you privately?" Alexander felt Ellie tense beside him. "Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of Alexander," she said. "It's about your background check," Victor said bluntly. Alexander groaned. "Dad, I told you, it's fine," Ellie interrupted. "I have nothing to hide, Mr. Reed." Victor was quiet for a moment. "I know," he finally said. "That's what I wanted to discuss. Your academic records from the Ohio Conservatory were exemplary. Your professors spoke very highly of your potential. What happened with your scholarship was unfortunate." "Wait," Alexander cut in. "You contacted her professors?" "I did," Victor admitted. "I wanted to understand the situation fully." "And now you do," Ellie said, her voice tight. "Satisfied?" "Not entirely," Victor replied. "I understand why you left Ohio. What I don't understand is why you've been sleeping on park benches when there are programs specifically designed to help young musicians in transitional housing situations." Ellie laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Have you tried getting into those programs, Mr. Reed? The wait lists are months long, and they want proof of enrollment in a school or regular employment. Hard to provide when you're washing dishes under the table for cash and practicing on public pianos." The room fell silent. Alexander could feel the tension between his father and Ellie, two stubborn, proud people sizing each other up. "The concert is in a week," Victor finally said. "Whatever happens there, I want you to know that the guest suite is available to you until you find proper housing. No strings attached." Before Ellie could protest, Victor added, "Consider it payment for helping my son rediscover his passion for music. That's not charity. It's fair compensation for a valuable service." With that, he left the room, his footsteps fading down the hall. "Did my father just outmaneuver you?" Alexander asked, amused. "Apparently business negotiation runs in the family," Ellie muttered. But Alexander could hear the smile in her voice. The night of the concert arrived with a light snowfall that dusted Manhattan in white. The Whitmore Academy's Grand Hall was decorated for the holidays, with subtle lights and greenery creating an elegant, festive atmosphere. Backstage, Alexander adjusted his bow tie nervously. "Are you ready?" he asked Ellie, who stood beside him. "I think so," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically small. "Your father's tailor is a miracle worker. I actually feel like I belong here." "You do belong here," Alexander said firmly. "More than most of the people in that audience." Mrs. Chen had helped Ellie select a midnight blue evening gown from a designer boutique, while Victor's personal tailor had fitted Alexander with a new tuxedo. They looked every inch the professional musicians they aspired to be. 5 minutes, the stage manager announced. Alexander reached for Ellie's hand. "Remember what you taught me? About playing the truth, not just the notes?" "I remember," she said. "That's all we need to do tonight. Play our truth." From the stage, they heard the master of ceremonies welcoming the audience and thanking Victor Reed for his generous support of arts education. "The Whitmore Academy is proud to present tonight's featured performance," the MC continued. "Please welcome Alexander Reed and Ellie Winters performing their original arrangement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 for dual pianos." Applause filled the hall as they walked on stage. Alexander could sense the audience's curiosity, the whispers, the program pages rustling as people read their bios, the slight murmur when Ellie was announced as his partner. The stage manager guided them to their respective pianos, positioned facing each other so they could communicate easily. Alexander settled onto the bench, his fingers finding the familiar keys, drawing comfort from their cool smoothness beneath his fingertips. "Ready?" Ellie whispered from across the short distance between their instruments. Alexander nodded, took a deep breath, and began the famous opening chords of the concerto. Immediately, he could tell this performance would be different. The piano felt like an extension of himself, responding to his lightest touch. Ellie joined in precisely on cue, her part weaving around his like a dance. Together, they built the music, phrase by phrase, section by section. Where Alexander played with power and precision, Ellie added delicacy and nuance. Where she created emotional depth, he provided structural foundation. They complemented each other perfectly, as if they'd been playing together for years instead of weeks. In the front row, Victor Reed sat very still, his expression unreadable to most. But Mrs. Chen, seated beside him, noticed the slight shine in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the armrests during the most moving passages. The audience was equally transfixed. There were no whispers now, no rustling programs, only rapt attention as the music filled the hall. This was not a novelty act, not the blind boy and the homeless girl putting on a brave show. This was artistry of the highest caliber, two exceptional musicians creating something greater than either could achieve alone. As they approached the final movement, Alexander felt something he'd never experienced before, a sense of complete freedom within the music. He wasn't thinking about the notes, wasn't worried about making mistakes. He was simply playing, feeling, living the music alongside Ellie. The final chords resonated through the hall, lingering in the air for one perfect moment of silence before the audience erupted. The applause was thunderous, immediate, and genuine. People rose to their feet, their admiration impossible to contain. Alexander and Ellie stood, bowing toward the audience. As they straightened, Ellie whispered, "Your father is on his feet, Alexander. He's smiling." Pride swelled in Alexander's chest, not just for himself but for what they had created together. As they left the stage, the applause continuing behind them, they were met by Dean Hayes of Juilliard. "Extraordinary," he said, shaking their hands warmly. "Truly extraordinary. Ms. Winters, we need to talk about an audition. And Mr. Reed, I hope you'll consider Juilliard as well. That level of musical communication is rare and should be nurtured." Before they could respond, Victor Reed joined them, placing a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "That was," he began, then paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "That was beautiful, son. I've never heard you play like that." "It was Ellie," Alexander said. "She showed me how to play from the heart, not just the head." "It was both of you," Victor corrected gently. "And I owe you both an apology. Especially you, Alexander. I've been trying to shape your future based on my own vision, not seeing what was right in front of me." He squeezed his son's shoulder. "You are a musician, a true artist, and I couldn't be prouder." Turning to Ellie, he added, "And you, young lady, have a remarkable gift, not just for playing but for teaching. The Whitmore Academy could use someone with your talents." Ellie frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I've endowed a scholarship program," Victor explained, "for promising musicians facing financial hardship, and I need someone to help run it, someone who understands both the musical and personal challenges these students face." "You want me to work for you?" Ellie asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "I want to sponsor your education at Juilliard," Victor clarified, "with the understanding that you'll contribute to the scholarship program's development in whatever capacity works with your studies." "It's not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "It's an investment in the future of music education." Alexander laughed. "He's getting better at this, isn't he?" 3 months later, Ellie moved out of the Reed penthouse guest suite and into her own small apartment near Juilliard, where both she and Alexander had been accepted for the fall semester. The Whitmore Academy Reed Scholarship Program had already identified its first 5 recipients, talented young musicians who might otherwise never have had the opportunity to develop their gifts. Alexander and Ellie continued to perform together regularly, their musical partnership growing stronger with each concert. Their story, the billionaire's blind son and the homeless girl who saved each other through music, spread through social media and traditional news outlets, challenging perceptions about privilege, disability, and talent. Victor Reed, to everyone's surprise, became one of the city's most passionate advocates for arts education, speaking often about how music had opened his eyes to possibilities he'd never imagined for his son. And in Washington Square Park, the weathered public piano remained, a silent witness to the beginning of an extraordinary musical journey. Occasionally, passers-by would see 2 young pianists there, one tall and fair-haired, moving with the careful precision of the blind, the other small and intense, her fingers dancing across the keys with joyful abandon. Together, they filled the park with music that spoke of struggle and triumph, of darkness and light, of 2 very different lives united by a shared language of notes and rhythms. It wasn't just beautiful music. It was truth.